Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips and a couple of announcements. First of all, if you are a health professional or you want to be a health professional, you're not trained yet, either way, we have professional development programs that might interest you. Fall semester starts in well, it's a little bit less than a month. So now would be the time to talk to us about taking classes. So if you are interested in a career change, or at least exploring that idea, send me an email at pampopper@msn.com. I would be happy to arrange a one-on-one phone call with you if you would like. These are important decisions. I invest a lot of time helping people decide what they want to be when they grow up, as it were, in the healthcare business. So let me know if you'd like to have a conversation with me about that. And then, of course, we're back to doing regular dinners at our office. I will have the fall calendar posted. Membership at Wellness Forum covers a lot of ground too. You get access to our libraries and conversations with Pam Q&As, and so I get a lot of emails from you guys about questions that you have. They're great questions, but there's just only so much typing I can do. And a lot of the information, or a lot of information about these issues, is posted in our libraries and videos that we have in our library as well. So anyway, if any of that interests you, send me an email at pampopper@msn.com. All right, so today I want to talk about serotonin and depression. According to a pretty extensive review by researchers in the UK, there is no convincing evidence that low serotonin levels are the cause of depression. I've been writing and speaking about this issue for almost 3 decades now, so I'm really glad to see the rest of the world catching up. The problem is, well, there are so many problems with this, but one of them is that surveys show that 80% of the public currently believes that chemical imbalances in the brain are responsible for psychological difficulties. I refuse to call any of this mental illness. It's not. These are simply problems with everyday living. And as a good friend of mine says often, being a human and can sometimes be really hard. According to senior author Mark Horwitz, who spoke with Medscape, and I think that his comments were spot on, so I'm just going to share them with you. We found no consistent evidence in the main avenues of serotonin research that there is an association between serotonin and depression, and we found no support for the hypothesis that lower serotonin activity or concentrations are responsible for depression. He said it's not an evidence-based statement to say that depression is caused by low serotonin. If we were more honest and transparent with patients, we should tell them that an antidepressant might have some use in numbing their symptoms, but it's extremely unlikely that it will be the solution or cure for their problem. And I can echo that. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who say that they're better since they started taking these drugs, but they're just numbed out. They don't feel pain, but they don't feel anything better either. Horwitz also says that, quote, most doctors tell their patients who are depressed that chemical imbalances in the brain are the reason they're depressed, but he says it's been known in academic circles that no good evidence has ever been found of low serotonin in depression, but drug company marketing has amplified the chemical imbalance and low serotonin hypothesis. And I would take issue with it's known in academic circles, because most of the people who fought against this false premise lost their jobs. Many people were fired from their university positions if they didn't agree and promote this crazy theory. He goes on to say that any chemical causes depression is probably a very suspect statement, because depression is a complex emotional and behavioral state that of course involves chemicals, but the idea that it can be pinpointed on a single chemical seems very unlikely. The endless search for a single chemical that causes depression is probably looking in the wrong place, because there's such strong evidence that circumstances of our lives, stressful life events, poverty, work, insecurity, relationships, have a strong effect on the risk of depression. As I mentioned before, there is no such thing as mental illness. There are people who have a lot of difficulty with living, and probably I can speak for myself, and I would imagine most of you have found times in your life when you were overwhelmed with just trying to navigate life and needed some help too. Our time is better spent, Horwitz says, by changing circumstances that lead to depression rather than trying to decipher the chemical equation of depression. In a press release, the study's lead investigator, Joanna Moncrief, who's a professor of psychiatry at University College London, said the study findings call antidepressant use into question. I mean, you think? She says, quote, epidemic proportions of the UK population are using antidepressants at the moment. Thousands of people suffer from their side effects, including the severe withdrawal effects that can occur when people try to continue to rise. This situation has been driven by the promotion of the false belief that depression is due to a chemical imbalance. It's high time to inform the public that this belief is not grounded in science. So where did this belief come from? How did everybody in the country get the idea that that this is what was going on? The chemical imbalances in the brain caused depression and anxiety and that sort of thing. Well, there are a whole lot of influences on it. If you want to read more about it, Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker is a really good textbook for explaining how it happened and also sharing the real data. But basically, decades ago, psychiatrists had developed quite the reputation for themselves. These were the docs in charge of mental institutions at which patients were locked up and subjected to barbaric treatments like insulin coma and electric shock and even frontal lobotomy. While this was going on, a whole mental health alternative business grew with psychologists and social workers and clergy who were pretty good at this. They developed reputations for helping people in meaningful ways. And this is when the psychiatrists decided that if they could be like real doctors wearing white coats and analyzing symptoms and prescribing drugs, they'd have an advantage over those other people who weren't real doctors and couldn't prescribe. Thus, the chemical imbalance in the brain theory was born, largely in partnership at the beginning with Eli Lilly, the drug company responsible for unleashing Prozac on the public. And by the way, even the trials for Prozac were so rigged, there were supposed to be 10,000 people in the trial and fewer than 100, I think it was about 148 who actually finished the trial. So what accounts for that dropout rate, right? Well, the only problem, as this most recent development shows, there was no basis for any of this. It was made up, and it will be decades before we clean up the damage. 25% of Americans today are medicated with something based on this false premise, and it might be for psychosis or anxiety or bipolar or depression, ADHD. I mean, they make up these various conditions to explain what is really difficulty with life. Most of the mass shootings have been committed by people taking these drugs, so it's another way in which people have been harmed. As the lead researcher said, people can't just easily withdraw from these drugs. It can take months and sometimes years, and some people can't discontinue them entirely or discontinue all of them if they're taking multiples. So what we have here is another episode of greed and careless disregard and just lack of respect for human life and health, which produced this and, gosh, decades of other damage as well. So, when I started talking about this, I was ridiculed, I was called names, I was marginalized. Everybody was. People lost their jobs, like I mentioned. There was hell to pay for pointing out that in this case the emperor had no clothes. Peter Breggin, who is often referred to as the conscience of psychiatry, has been one of the most outspoken people about this and has single-handedly extracted millions and millions of dollars from drug companies and trials that filed in lawsuits filed on behalf of families and people who've been incredibly harmed by these god-awful products that are baseless. No reason to prescribe them to anybody, in my opinion. So this is a truth in medicine moment, and one of the big problems is going to be, how does the medical profession now start to convince everybody, gosh, we made a mistake, and who's going to pay for the financial burden of helping all these people whose lives have been compromised and in some cases ruined? It's going to be unbelievable. So I'll continue to tell you the truth, and I'll continue to take the arrows for it, because sooner or later the truth comes out, and it turns out that those of us who were talking about this years ago were right about it. And so sometimes it takes a while for things to sort themselves out, but they always do. All right, as usual, pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.